Y'all will have to bear with me somewhat during the day. As I said, I've been practicing commercial space since the early 80s, so I know most of the people, but the interesting thing is that it's such a dynamic field these days that you can't keep up, literally can't keep up with everything and everyone. So if I profess ignorance about some of the presentations today, it's not because I'm not looking forward to hearing them with perked ears. It's just simply that I think it's a good sign. It's a sign that we've got a healthy and a dynamic industry. And with that introduction, I'd like to see if Greg Bennett is here. He is here. Great. I've not had the pleasure of meeting him. But I can tell you that I, like everyone else that reads space news, have been seeing these big ads that says Bigelow Aerospace, Las Vegas, Nevada. I had the privilege the last few months of spending a lot of time in Vegas. Our Encounter 2001 mission opened a facility at Star Trek The Experience, and I thought, you know, what's a commercial space guy doing out here in Las Vegas? It's a completely different world. I think we're about to hear that from Greg Bennett, who has more than 25 years in aerospace engineering and has a really broad range of management and technical responsibilities. He is now VP of Spacecraft Development at Bigelow Aerospace. Most of you know him as a very successful, interesting, and fascinating science fiction author, and I can say I've had the privilege of reading several of your works, just haven't met you before. So let's give a welcome to Greg Bennett.
I'm Greg. Nice to meet you. I guess has everyone here been to one of the other times I've been making noise at this conference? So I probably don't need to go into a lot of detail about what we're doing at Bigelow Aerospace, but I'd be happy to answer questions if you got them. But I should explain those ads. I was still working for Boeing when they were laying out those advertisements that are running in Space News. What they say is Bigelow Aerospace general contractors for orbiting space complexes or something like that. Now hiring, positions immediately available, or employment available for all positions. And that has my name in 48-point type and the address of the Bigelow Company's headquarters. I was still working for Boeing, and I got a call one Monday morning from my boss. And he said, "Hey, have you given notice at Boeing yet? And you told these guys that you're leaving?" And I said, "Well, yeah, just this morning." He said, "Oh, thank God." Because he started running those advertisements before I even left Houston. And in case you missed that plot point, I spent almost 20 years here at the Johnson Space Center doing all kinds of neat stuff. You know, one of those jobs where you sit there saying, "Gee, they pay me for this." Many of those jobs where you say that. But the fact of the matter is actually, it's a little misleading because right now we're just getting started. I spent the last 5 weeks of my life working 28 hours a day trying to put together the Spacecraft Development Division. Bigelow Aerospace is actually operating as a division of the Bigelow Development Company. And the Bigelow Development Company, develops hotels. They design and build hotels. So I guess that's sort of explains why we're getting into the space hotel business. There's something else I wanted to say about. Oh, yeah. I'm going to keep advertising. If you know any industrial designers, the guys that design user-friendly toasters, tell them to send me the resume. I'd like to hear from them.
I think an important thing I learned not to use, you're not interested in propulsion or how to get there.
Right, oh yeah, and
So you don't want rocket.
Right, we should, right now, we really don't need rocket engineers. We will, eventually. There's the space hotel that's got to have some rockets on it. But we're just getting started in conceptual design. And I mean, we have how do you say this? We've got ideas for what we want to build. We know that we want to build orbiting facilities that will have spin gravity. That's a term I learned at this conference. And we figure that we might want to run about 0.4 Gs of gravity at no more than 1 revolution per minute. And the reason for that is that if you spin faster than that, people get sick. And the reason for 0.4 Gs is it feels about right. It just shows you how well is enough. Maybe Mars gravity in a third of a G would be just right. 0.4 Gs feels fairly comfortable, and we don't know. And so you can see we've got a long way to go before we're deploying space hotels. But what Richard Brostad asked me to talk about was the promise of space tourism. And it's a real important point to understand about tourism and why it's finally going to get us into space to do what we've always wanted to do. And you've heard me pound the pulpit about it. I get off NASA's back. Tourism ain't their job. There isn't a single agency of the federal government that's into tourism except maybe national parks. And they have a role there of retaining a national treasure. But today, tourism is the second largest industry in the world, second largest export industry in the world. Oil is number one. But tourism is $1 trillion industry. And I was just reading, getting a conceptual design for this thing, one of the very first things that my boss asked me to do, he said, run out and buy a whole bunch of boating magazines, see if you can find stuff about super yachts and cruise ships. Because the cruise ship analogy is probably a lot closer to where we're going with this thing than just a hotel. And so I did, and I learned some interesting things reading about cruise ships, like sort of like the hotels in Las Vegas. Everybody's nervous about how many cruise ships they're building, but people keep filling them up. Every year, a new billion-dollar cruise ship is launched. And most of them seem to be designed by these guys in Norway, which is kind of unfortunate that it's a little far to go out there to steal the people. But, I mean, to seek their help. But, there's another interesting question. How many people here have done a capital tour of Europe? You know, gone to see all of the capitals of Europe? Notice how many hands are not up. Okay. Anybody seen Nepal? And all those, what do you call them, churches? No, that's not the right word. Churches. Has anyone here seen with your own eyes the Stele of Hammurabi? Or even know what it is? We're talking about major tourist things in the world. Who's been to Tokyo? Wow, okay. Almost 10% of the crowd has been to Tokyo. How about Christchurch? Who's seen Christchurch when the gardens are blooming? I have. That's good. I can raise my hand for this one. Who's been to Antarctica? Golly, you're a world traveler. Okay, but I think I just made an important point. When we start talking about space tourism, and you're well aware that the tourism is going to be incredibly expensive. It probably could be $250,000 for this vision that we're talking about, sending tourist ships that go looping around the moon. But it gets us started. And the important point I wanted to make there is that just because us guys in this room, us folks in this room, are not in that line, it doesn't necessarily mean that it ain't going to work. There is a demand for all kinds of tourism and all kinds of very expensive tourist experiences. You probably heard it quoted. You can spend $100,000 today if you want to and take a trip up Mount Everest, or you can spend a couple $1,000 and hike up Mount Rainier up in Washington State. And the big difference in those two trips, incidentally, you can literally walk up Mount Rainier and the view from there is real pretty. It's a clear day, which happens every few years. But once the demand gets started, that gets the ships designed. You know, I was talking to Bob Zubrin, who was stuck on the elevator where everyone else is in this during this convention. About one of the neat things that's going to come out of this, if we build a spacecraft capable of supporting 150 people, 100 passengers, 50 crew, that can do a loop around the moon in 6 days, we could swap out some of the mass of the people and their baggage for some ham sandwiches and put a honky gray rocket on that thing, you know, or maybe grab it with a tether and just give it a toss. And we could actually be building the Mars ship that he wants to build. And it's an important point. What we're seeing right now is just the seeds of space tourism. And the most important thing that's happening is that we finally got one guy with the resources who is interested in making this happen and is willing and committed to making it happen. He's going to keep on working for a long time. The third day on the job, when I was out in Las Vegas, I didn't know anything about Las Vegas, and I still don't know much about a Las Vegas, other than it's a big city in a mountain valley in the southern Rocky Mountains. But on the third day of the job, my boss flew out to Los Angeles, and that was kind of fun. And they picked me up in the morning, we go out there, jump on his jet, and fly out to Los Angeles for a meeting with John Spencer and his cronies. Anybody knew John Spencer is? Head of the Space Tourism Society, space architect kind of guy. Just really out of the box kind of thinker. And while we were there meeting, you know, John just blurted out, he came out and he said, Bob, meaning Bob Bigelow, you don't know how long I waited for some billionaire to come along and want to do this. Of course, all I could say was, yeah, you can say that again. I got the job. And that's a real important point. Bigelow might be the first company to commit to doing this. And we can commit to doing it mainly because we have a fellow who's very successful in the hospitality industry who has the personal resources to pull this off. There's no board of directors to worry about, no stockholders to worry about. But that drives the thin edge of the wedge. You know, like Dan Brandenstein was talking about companies out there looking, you know, getting funding for tourism ventures and things like that. And for the big companies, big old Boeing, for example, it's a matter of overcoming the timidity of the board of directors and the stockholders. You've really got thousands and thousands of people you have to justify everything to do. But if we get started in it, there surely will be others, and others with even greater resources. We don't pretend to have the resources to solve the entire equation for taking everybody into space that we want to. But at least we're getting started. It's the thin edge of the wedge. You know? The subject of the Artemis project is pretty clear. When I did the talk on the Artemis project, was it just yesterday? Everybody know what the Artemis project is? You know, in a nutshell, we're talking about establishing a permanent self-supporting community on the moon, meaning that they're economically or financially self-supporting. And we've been working on that since 1994, actually since 1976, but we gave it a name in 1994. If we can build these cruise ships that are taking you on a loop around the moon, then we're almost there. We're in translunar orbit and actually going around the moon. So we're physically present with not exactly the right velocity for entering lunar orbit, but at that point, it's up to us loonies to build some ships that will just go up there and grab people off the cruise ship, you know, to exchange passengers in that brief period of time, probably a few hours, when you're close to the moon, and bring people down to the moon and back up again. So we have a place to go. Okay. I'm not going to ramble on too much longer because otherwise I'm going to get tossed out of here. But so we're moving along. We're well past the stage where this is an idea that somebody might do, and of course, if the money works, then the other corporations will follow. And we're finally going to get to the point of doing in space what we've always wanted to do ever since we ever heard of the Mercury program. Those of us who are old enough to remember the Mercury program. We're finally going to be able to be flying people in space, and that's the real promise of space tourism. I got time for a couple of questions.
Any idea what the payback period is on those billion-dollar cruise ships? How long is a certain corporation willing to wait for it to pay for itself?
No, I've never sat down to calculate it. All it'd be pretty straightforward. You get a cruise ship brochure, and you know, work through how much.
Staterooms?
Yeah, count the staterooms. Figure out, look at fire up Excel and run an amortization table on the ship, and you know, wild guess how long they pay it off.
I figured that.
And most important, count the crew. And cruise ships typically have one crew member per passenger cabin. Big luxury hotels typically have one employee per room. That's a lot of employees. And then you figure out how much they're getting paid, and yes, a fully burdened labor rate of $50,000 a year per person or something like that. And you can get it within just haven't had time to do that yet. And I haven't done it for our cruise ship either. A lot of the numbers I'm quoting, like saying we got a half a chance of pulling this stunt off in the next 15 years, that's just, well, I mean, it comes from my boss's gut instinct. But his gut instinct, of course, is driven by a tremendous amount of intuition in the hospitality industry, and a tremendous amount of experience. And not just his own experience, but of course, I mean, he lives in Las Vegas and has for 35 years. And so when his when he gets a gut feeling about how these things are going to work, he's working with an awful lot of data. And he's seen all of those great big huge toys get built up and down Las Vegas Boulevard. And those guys that build them. And it's kind of fun, actually. One of the first things that happened to me when I was driving to Las Vegas, Bob and I were going somewhere driving in his car. And we just happened to drive all the way down Las Vegas Boulevard. And he's a heck of a tour guide, because he can tell you who owns each one of those properties and how much it cost and when it was developed, how many rooms it has. And you can kind of tell also right about here in his mind, there's this little calculator going saying, oh, let's see, that's so many rooms, $105 a night, double occupancy, you know. And he's not in that industry, really, except maybe places like the Mount Charleston Hotel. Anybody knows anything about Las Vegas, that's another one of his properties. And he owns it. It's you know, if you go to Budget Suites of America or one of his other hotels, go out to Mount Charleston and play the golf courses and stuff like that. You know, when you sit on that sofa, you're sitting in Bob's living room. And it's kind of exciting because I stayed there for the Budget Suites for 5 weeks and realized that, hey, I'm sitting in my boss's living room. He owns this sofa I'm sitting on. Any other questions before I shut up? Can we keep rolling?
Yeah, let's
okay,
do it.
thanks.
Great. Thanks very much. So I mentioned we've got a facility out in Vegas, and we've been sitting in his living room a few times because we rented 2 or 3 suites out at the Budget Suites as we were putting up our store at the Hilton. So that's great to know.
Best hotel deal in Vegas.
It really is. It really is. Okay, thanks very much. That's great. Again, as I said, I think you're going to get a wonderful mix today of, I think Richard tried to put together real activities. I think that was one of his criteria as he put the speakers together today.